Welcome explorers. Today, dive into the thrilling TTP narration of Hunting with Predators by Banancake, a 25-part fan-made saga from the Nature of Predators series by Spacepaladin15 on r/HFY.
Memory transcription subject, Vickery, the honey badger. Date, standardized human time, October 31, 2136, 14 days after the Battle of Earth. I stood in the middle of what had become a standing pile of humans. It was freezing, but the collective heat of 12 humans staved it off. I saw now why early humans wore the skin of other animals. Standing in this with zero insulation would kill any creature in minutes. Nature had taken away their fur, so they took fur away from nature. We'd hurried up a hill after Querec took off so we'd have a good view of the exact direction the missile was launching from. The sun was only just breaking the horizon. From beside me, Grant shivered before he chuckled. We look like a bunch of penguins. The group of humans shared a collective giggle before crossing their arms and bundling up again. I pulled on Grant's coat. "What's a penguin?" I whispered. "Flightless birds that are really good swimmers." I couldn't tell if he was joking or not. One of my ears flopped over while I looked up at him. He scoffed. "Yes, they're real, and it gets much weirder than that. Nothing on this planet makes any sense. I've got to see some of this stuff when I get out of here." Reese let out a shivering breath from between his teeth. "What the hell's taking so long?" Tenga shuffled. "He's getting some distance before popping up. Should be any minute now. I'm liable to freeze to death any minute now." Right on cue, a missile shot up from beyond the mountains. We stood there on the hill and watched it ascend in stunned silence before it turned toward the west. Grant whipped out a compass. "Got the bearing?" Tenga asked. "Yeah. 35 degrees northeast from here. We gotta get there in as straight a line as possible." Foster stepped down the hill. "Well, to all of you whining about the cold, now's a great time to get your blood flowing." She motioned us down the hill. I followed behind Grant as we descended and watched the missile pass overhead. A sonic boom blasted the hillside seconds later, causing me to stumble for a moment. The sound of its giant nuclear engine followed, rattling the air with the noise of a billowing jet of fire. Grant and I watched it pass overhead as we walked. "Good luck, buddy," Grant whispered before turning back around. I exhaled and followed behind him, marching across the road and up into the hills. We trudged up the slope, making a hasty pace. We used the same two-column marching order that we had before, only this time, I was near the front, just behind Tenga and Reese. Sigra was between them and us. The humans used their spears as walking sticks as we weaved between the pines. The slope was steep, getting steeper, and not leveling out anytime soon. My legs ached as I plodded up behind Reese. Another sonic boom rocked the trees. I instinctively ducked for a moment as another missile passed overhead. "Another one?" I muttered, watching the trail of plasma dissipate high above me. "Looks like it," Reese said, craning his neck upward. "Guess that means the first one missed." Tenga scoffed. "I guess that's one way of looking at it." He shook his head. "I'll kill him if he dies." There was no time to stand around and gawk. Sensing I was struggling to keep up, Grant went ahead and slung me onto his shoulders. I wasn't expecting it, but I certainly didn't protest. I was already struggling to catch my breath, and I didn't want to be the one slowing them down. Sigra, however, was a much more complicated case. Her stubby legs could hardly carry her through the snow, much less keep up with the relentless pace of the persistent predators she was surrounded by. Tenga had to pause many times to let her catch up to him, which slowed down the whole line. Carrying her would be a lot more difficult too. Not just because of her fear but because she was bigger than the average Venlil as well. Tenga sighed. "We can't do this for the next 10 kilometers, Sigra. Someone's gonna have to carry you." Sigra panted, kneeling down in the snow. "I'm sorry, I wasn't made for this." Her eyes darted between Tenga and the rest of the group sporadically, avoiding eye contact with any of us. "I can carry you up this hill," but you need to keep those spikes to yourself. Sigra stammered for a moment as she hesitated. We still have those sedatives if you'd rather go that route, Foster added. No. Honestly, the idea of being unconscious is worse. She nervously stumbled toward Tenga. How do you want to do this? Tenga sighed. Piggyback, just like Vic. Now this would be interesting. I snickered to myself as I watched Tenga lift Sigra up on his back. Of course, he was immediately pricked with a quill in the arm. There was no way Sigra was keeping those spikes away while literally riding a predator. Tenga simply took a breath through his teeth and sighed. Sigra was in the most awkward state I'd ever seen. She feared she'd angered Tenga but wasn't sure if she should get down and run, risking angering him more, or just stay on the back of a mad predator. I am sorry. I didn't mean to, really. I can't help it. Maybe this was a bad idea. Her eyes went wide. She seemed to want to curl up and hide, but she was stuck on the back of a human. Calm down, Tenga said sternly. Grant and I couldn't hold in our laughter anymore. We both started snickering as we watched them struggle. Tenga shook his head. Next time, we're trading. The slope was relentless. After a few more minutes, Tenga started struggling. The extra weight was clearly doing a number on him. Trading her off wasn't really an option either. Tenga was likely the only one Sigra trusted enough to carry her. As far as she knew, the other humans had it out for her. That assumption wasn't totally baseless. I'd noticed a few of them staring at her with less than friendly expressions a pawful of times now. I didn't really know these humans, but not all of them might have shared the same even temperament as Tenga. I couldn't blame them. I doubted any of them knew Sigra's military position, but as far as they knew, she could be directly responsible for the death of their families. I shuddered to think about the displays of anger that might emerge from my humans. If Reese found out he'd lost his family, would he be the same person? I'd seen Tenga brutally choke and slash a wolf to death without feeling any anger, according to him. If a human could do that without hatred, what could they do with it? I had a feeling that I would soon find out if things got violent with the Federation stragglers. Finally, the slope leveled out. Sigra yelped as Tenga simply let her plop down in the snow. The human rested his hands on his knees, doubling over slightly. He panted. Lesson learned, Gojids are much heavier than Venlil. He winced as he yanked the quill out of his jacket. Come on, get walking. Sigra sat up out of the snow and trudged forward once again. Grant held his compass in one hand and supported me on his back with the other. I had to steer him away from trees and rocks several times. His eyes were glued to the primitive device, staying as true to the original bearing as possible. Eventually, we reached a crest in the mountains overlooking a sprawling, rocky pass. Grant set me down while the rest of the group joined us. We should be close, Grant breathed. Tenga exhaled as he stood beside him, placing his hands on his hips. So, where the hell is it? Great question. I scanned the landscape below us. There were plenty of places for a ship to hide, and we weren't even entirely sure what kind of ship we were looking for. A small enough vessel could easily fit between any of these hills. Reese walked up beside me and got out a pair of binoculars. Grant followed suit with the scope on his rifle. They both scanned the horizon for a moment before Reese stopped. What the, Grant, look 10 o'clock. I looked in the direction he was pointing and was shocked that I'd missed it the first time. In the distance, following the curve of the pass, was the outline of the rear section of a crocodile vessel. It was half buried in snow, soil, and rock. Its hull was dusted with snow and ice, painting it a pale white. I'd mistaken it for a part of the mountain from this distance. A haunting numbness fell over me when I recognized it. We could have walked right by it and never seen it. Grant lowered the rifle from his face. Yeah. That's it. He turned to Tenga. How do you want to do this? I'm not sure they won't just shoot on sight. Tenga looked back at Foster and the rest. I figure we can send Sigra in first. Get their attention, get them to lower their guard. Then, we'll surround them. If they have any sense, they'll at least refrain from starting a shootout immediately. Then we'll negotiate. Grant can cover us from the hillside if any of them try to pull a fast one on us. Foster stepped forward and turned to the group. If, and only if they shoot first, any armed soldier is fair game. She stood beside me. Your primary objective will be to get Vickery inside and protect him while he disables the ship's systems. The group looked over at me. Dozens of predatory eyes sized me up at once. A few of them nodded. Others smiled. I shuffled slightly as I swished my tail over the snow. I could tell they trusted me, and I was determined not to let them down. I could be their only shot at getting out of here. Foster turned toward the ship. We can't know how many are really down there. Be ready for anything. She scanned over the group for a moment. She breathed deeply. I know you're all hurting. And I know seeing the enemy that tried to exterminate you like rats might sway you to act rashly. Don't lose yourselves trying to take justice into your own hands. We're better than that, and we'll prove it. Clear? Yes, ma'am, the group said in unison. We set off toward the wreck. Grant stood on the hillside, peering down at the port side of the Crocodile destroyer, a cutting-edge warship nestled against the side of the adjacent ridge. Though now, its once sleek hull was riddled with holes and tears with clear outlines of soot and melted metal near the edges. The ship had taken a beating long before it landed in this valley. Behind it, the trajectory it took when it came down was made clear by a trail of upturned rock, trees, and soil behind it. The destroyer was quite small by starship standards, supporting a maximum crew of a couple hundred. The belly of the vessel was mangled and crushed, half buried in the earth. From the outside, the ship seemed eerily lifeless. I began to suspect that perhaps this wasn't our target but yet another husk icing over in the snow. That suspicion was quickly alleviated when Grant turned around. They're definitely down there. How many? Foster asked. A dozen or so outside. No telling how many are inside, but I assume at least a dozen more. Foster paced for a second. Okay, we can handle a dozen. We'll need to encircle them and pin them between us and the ship, but we have to do it without being seen. If they see us coming, that gives them time to get everyone else out of the ship, and that'll cause all kinds of problems. Grant, take someone with you and find a good spot. The rest of you move into the trees. Take it slow and steady. Grant patted one of the soldiers on the shoulder, and the two jogged off further up the hill. The rest of us descended toward the dense forest nestled between the mountains. Sigra made sure never to leave Tenga's side. As we got closer, we moved slower. The humans walked the same way mine did when backtracking the bear. They rolled their feet with each step, distributing pressure evenly on the snow beneath to minimize noise. Tenga gave a series of hand signals, and the humans spread out into a wide half-circle, holding their weapons at the ready as we got ever closer to our ticket out of here. When the icy metal of the ship's hull came into view between the pines, Foster motioned for everyone to get down. In front of me, Tenga crawled into a prone position, never taking his eyes off the goal ahead. The others did the same. They crept forward, digging deeper into the snow until they were practically invisible from the front. From here, I could see movement up ahead, though it was difficult to discern how many there were or what they were doing. I wondered if they were expecting us after they launched 3 missiles. It would be difficult for anyone nearby to miss. In a way, it was nerve-wracking that they didn't launch a 4th. I'd never know if Querek survived the 3rd until this ship was offline. I took a deep breath as I lay beside Tenga and Sigra. The Gojid was a mess. The walk over here had been rough on her, and the stress of what she was about to do was clearly eating her resolve. I could hear her trembling breaths as she lay in the snow. Her eyes were fixed on the shapes moving in the trees as she swallowed. Foster looked back from just ahead of us. She stared at Sigra for a moment before whispering, "Sigra." The Gojid finally slipped out of the trance and met the commander's gaze. Her quills bristled slightly. Foster seemed to read her expression for a moment before nodding. "Just go over there and act like you're a normal crash survivor. Get their attention and hold it until we reveal our hand. Their lives depend on you. Sigra looked ahead at the ship. Her breathing quickened slightly before she stood up and began approaching the group of stragglers. In my mind, I started running through everything that could go wrong, and there were many of those scenarios. The most frightening one was that Sigra might betray us. It didn't seem likely. She did genuinely seem to want peace from all this, and if Tenga thought that she regretted what she did, then I believed him. I watched as Sigra disappeared into the trees. In the distance, I heard her call out. "Hello? Somebody help." The humans began to move forward slowly. I stayed on Tenga's heels as he crouched and closed in on the stragglers. Up ahead, new voices were picked up by my translator. "Who's there? Show yourself." "I'm Federation." Sigra shouted. "I'm a Gojid intelligence officer. I picked up your transponder and followed the signal here." "Please, I'm so hungry." The humans moved in unison toward the voices, slowly tightening the circle around the source of the sound. They stayed low and held their rifles level toward the site. My ears perked up as I tried to listen closer. I heard another new voice. "Sigra?" Squinting ahead, I could see a crocodile climbing up from a hole leading toward the bottom of the ship. It was difficult to discern much detail on his appearance, but his voice suggested he was relieved. Sigra seemed to stammer for a moment. "Flen." We were getting close enough to get a better view of the situation. 10 crocodile were scattered about in front of a path cut into the snow that I could only assume led to an entryway on the destroyer. The 10 avians began to approach Sigra, clustering together around her. Several were armed. Flen, the 11th, joined them between Sigra and the ship. I can't believe you're alive. It's been weeks. Is it just you?" Sigra looked away from the crocodile, making eye contact with me for a split second before turning back to the group. "Yes. It's just me. The others, a predator killed them." "A human?" one of the crocodile asked. "No. A wild animal. It was gigantic. It killed them and didn't even eat them," Sigra strained. "I'm sad to hear that," Flen said. "Have you run into any humans?" Sigra seemed to stiffen up slightly. "No. Thank the protector." Flen stepped closer. "I knew you were lucky, but it's unbelievable that you survived on your own. Why don't you come inside? We're going hungry ourselves, but we'll get you something to eat and get you warmed up." Sigra hesitantly stepped forward. We were close, but not close enough. Sigra stopped. "How many others are here?" Flen turned around. "I don't have an exact number, you'd have to ask the captain, but I think there are around 30 or 40 here. We've tried to get our engines running again so we can get out of here, but the Arxer shot them to pieces." "Arxer?" Sigra stammered. "You mean humans?" Flen approached closer once again. "So you didn't see? The Arxer showed up with a fleet numbering in the thousands. We didn't stand a chance. Seems the humans are allied with the Arxer now," he explained. "That shouldn't be a surprise to you, of all people. You studied the humans for weeks." Sigra backpedaled a couple of steps. She glanced in our direction before looking at the ground. Tenga and I looked at each other. Both of us were in stunned disbelief. I didn't think the Arxer and the humans would get along. "Predators are competitive by nature," Sigra said. Flen looked in the direction she glanced before looking down at her. "I guess that's true, but it seems the predators have put aside their differences for the time being." From where we stalked in the forest, I could hear Sigra start panting. Flen knelt down. "Sigra, are you all right?" The humans closed in to tighten the circle one last time, walking out into the open as they revealed themselves. One by one, the crocodile realized that they were surrounded by predators. They stood in a tight circle, practically back to back. The humans barked an assortment of commands, most of which were some variation of "drop your weapons" and "don't move." A few began to raise their weapons before Flen stopped them. Wait! Wait! We'd be dead by now if they wanted that. I won't be taken as cattle, Flen, one of them shouted back. They don't do that, Sigra whimpered. Flen's eyes widened. He looked at the Gojid. Sigra, you. Tears glossed over Sigra's eyes. I'm sorry.